I'm Maya Chun, 28, a former art therapist turned freelance graphic designer. I work from my small studio apartment ever since my parents cut off financial support 3 years ago. The wedding invitation felt like broken glass between my fingers as I stared at the elegant script announcing my sister's marriage to David. My David, the man who used to trace constellations on my palm in the dark, who knew my heartbeat better than his own before my parents convinced him I was too damaged to love. The cream-colored cardstock trembled as my hands shook, the embossed letters catching the harsh fluorescent light of my studio apartment. Outside, Seattle's perpetual drizzle painted streaks down my window, each droplet carrying the weight of 3 years of exile. The scent of turpentine and acrylic paint couldn't mask the staleness of my isolation, the way loneliness had settled into every corner of this place like dust. I could still hear my mother's voice from that terrible night, sharp as winter wind cutting through the hospital corridor. Maya's episodes are getting worse. She's not stable enough for a relationship, especially not with someone as vulnerable as David. The memory tasted bitter, metallic, like blood from biting my tongue too hard to keep from screaming the truth. David couldn't see the lies in their eyes, couldn't catch the calculated glances between my parents as they painted me as the family's broken bird. His blindness, which had never been a barrier between us, became their weapon against our love. They whispered poison in his ear during my mandatory 72-hour psychiatric hold, a hold they'd orchestrated after finding the flash drive hidden in my bedroom. Before I go further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if you're hooked already, a like and subscribe will keep these stories coming. The flash drive. Even now, 3 years later, my pulse quickened thinking about it. Such a small thing, barely larger than my thumbnail, containing enough evidence to destroy my family's carefully constructed facade. I'd stumbled upon it by accident while helping my father organize his home office, tucked behind a loose baseboard like a guilty secret. The files inside had made my stomach turn, made me understand why my parents had always treated me like a liability rather than a daughter. I set the invitation aside and walked to my easel, where an unfinished painting waited, a storm-dark canvas with slashes of red that looked too much like wounds. My art had become angrier since the exile, each brushstroke a scream I couldn't voice aloud. The therapist my insurance barely covered said it was healthy expression. I called it survival. The apartment felt smaller today, the walls pressing closer as I imagined David standing at an altar, promising forever to my sister Elena while believing I'd abandoned him without explanation. Elena, with her perfect smile and perfectly normal brain chemistry, who'd never spent a night in a psychiatric ward or needed medication to function. Elena, who'd swooped in to comfort David during his difficult time after my supposed breakdown. My phone buzzed against the paint-stained table. A text from an unknown number. Maya, it's David. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need to see you before the wedding. There are things I need to understand. Meet me at our old spot in Pike Place Market tomorrow at 2 p.m. Please. The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering against the hardwood floor. David's voice echoed in my memory, the way he used to say my name like a prayer, like I was something precious instead of broken. The market, where we'd spent countless Saturday mornings, where he taught me to navigate by sound and touch, where I'd fallen in love with his laugh as it bounced off the brick walls. I pressed my back against the cool window, feeling the vibration of rain against glass. 3 years of silence, and now this. The timing couldn't be coincidental. 5 days before his wedding to my sister, he wanted answers I wasn't sure I could give without destroying what little remained of my family. But maybe destruction was exactly what they deserved. I picked up the phone with trembling hands and typed back, "I'll be there." As I hit send, a sound made me freeze. Footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment, slow and deliberate. The building was old, and I knew every creak and groan of its bones. These weren't the hurried steps of Mrs. Patterson from 3B or the heavy boots of the maintenance man. These footsteps paused directly outside my door. A soft knock echoed through the silence, 3 measured taps that made my skin crawl with recognition. The knocking stopped, but the silence that followed felt heavier than sound. I pressed my ear against the door, holding my breath until my lungs burned. Nothing. Just the distant hum of traffic and my own thundering heartbeat. When I finally opened the door, the hallway stretched empty in both directions, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like trapped insects. But there, on the worn carpet at my feet, lay a manila envelope with my name written in my father's precise handwriting, the same script that had signed my commitment papers 3 years ago. Inside the envelope, a single photograph made my knees buckle. David and Elena at what looked like a rehearsal dinner, his hand resting on her shoulder while she gazed at him with practiced adoration. But it wasn't their pose that stole my breath. It was the background. My parents' dining room, the same room where they'd held family meetings about my condition, where they'd decided my fate over Sunday roast and red wine. Beneath the photo, a note in my mother's flowing cursive. Some secrets are better left buried, Maya. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. The threat was clear, wrapped in maternal concern like poison and honey. They knew about my plan to meet David. They were watching, waiting, ready to paint me as the unstable ex-girlfriend who couldn't let go. The familiar weight of helplessness settled on my shoulders, the same feeling that had consumed me during those 72 hours in the psychiatric ward when no one would listen to my protests. I crumpled the note and threw it across the room, watching it bounce off my easel and land among scattered paint tubes. The anger felt good, clean, like fire burning away cobwebs. For 3 years, I'd been the ghost in their story, the cautionary tale they whispered about at family gatherings I was no longer invited to. But ghosts could haunt, and I still had the flash drive. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, Seattle's perpetual melancholy matching my mood as I made my way to Pike Place Market. The familiar chaos of vendors calling out prices and tourists snapping photos felt surreal after years of self-imposed isolation. I'd forgotten how alive the world could feel, how many colors existed beyond the muted palette of my apartment. David stood exactly where I knew he'd be, near the flower stalls where we used to buy daffodils every spring, where he proposed with a ring made from a twisted wire stem because we were too young and broke for anything real. He looked older, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, but his hands still moved with the same careful grace as he ran his fingers along the edge of a wooden crate. Maya. He turned toward my voice before I'd even spoken, that uncanny ability of his to sense my presence in a crowded room. You came. You asked me to. The words came out sharper than I intended, 3 years of hurt compressed into 4 syllables. He stepped closer, and I caught the scent of his cologne. Different now, something Elena must have chosen. The betrayal of it hit me like a physical blow. Even his smell belonged to her now. I need to know why you left, he said, his voice barely audible above the market's din. One day, we were planning our future, and the next you were gone. Your parents said you'd had a breakdown, that you didn't want to see me, but something never felt right about their story. The irony was suffocating. David, who navigated the world through truth and trust because he had to, had been fed the biggest lie of all. I wanted to tell him everything, about the flash drive, about my parents' manipulation, about the nights I'd cried myself to sleep knowing he thought I'd abandoned him. But the weight of my mother's threat pressed down like a stone on my chest. Sometimes people just aren't meant to be together, I said instead, hating myself for each word. That's not an answer, Maya. That's what someone says when they're protecting something. His hand reached out, stopping just short of touching my face. I know you. I know the sound of your breathing when you're lying. Before I could respond, a familiar laugh cut through the market noise like a blade. Elena's voice, bright and musical, calling out to someone across the way. I turned to see her approaching with my mother, both of them carrying shopping bags and wearing expressions of perfectly orchestrated surprise. Maya. Elena's smile could have powered the city. What a wonderful coincidence. David mentioned he might stop by the market today. Her arm slipped through his with practiced ease, a gesture that screamed ownership. My mother's eyes found mine, cold and calculating. Darling, you look thin. Are you eating enough? The concern in her voice was theater, performed for David's benefit. I'm fine, Mom. The word mom tasted like ash. We should all have coffee, Elena suggested, her voice honey-sweet. Catch up properly. It's been far too long since we've all been together. The suggestion hung in the air like a trap, waiting to spring. David's face showed confusion, sensing undercurrents he couldn't identify. My mother's smile never wavered, but her eyes promised consequences if I didn't play along. Actually, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, I was just leaving. But as I turned to go, David's hand caught my wrist. His touch sent electricity up my arm, muscle memory of 1,000 gentle caresses. Wait, he said. There's something else. Something I found in Elena's things yesterday while helping her pack for the honeymoon. Elena's perfect composure cracked for just a moment, a flash of panic crossing her features before the mask slipped back into place. David, sweetheart, we really should. A flash drive, he continued, his grip on my wrist tightening. Hidden in a jewelry box. When I asked Elena about it, she said it belonged to you, Maya. Said you'd left it behind when you moved out. The world tilted sideways. My mother's face had gone pale, and Elena looked like she might be sick. The flash drive, my insurance policy, my proof, had been in Elena's possession this entire time. What was on it? I whispered. David's expression was unreadable. I think you know. The coffee shop Elena had suggested felt like a stage set for an execution. We sat in a corner booth, the four of us arranged like pieces on a chessboard, David and I on one side, Elena and my mother on the other. The air between us crackled with unspoken truths and barely contained lies. David placed the flash drive on the scarred wooden table between us. Such a small thing to hold so much power, so much pain. My mother's hands trembled as she reached for her latte, the first crack I'd seen in her armor in 3 years. I haven't looked at what's on it yet, David said quietly. I wanted to hear the truth from all of you first. Elena's laugh sounded like breaking glass. David, honey, you're making this into something it's not. It's probably just old photos or school projects. Stop. The word came out harder than I intended, cutting through Elena's performance like a knife. 3 years of silence, 3 years of letting them control the narrative, and I was done. Just stop lying to him. My mother leaned forward, her voice dropping to that dangerous whisper I remembered from childhood. Maya, think very carefully about what you're about to do. What I'm about to do. The anger that had been simmering for years finally boiled over. What about what you did? What you all did? David's head turned toward me, his expression shifting from confusion to something sharper. Maya, what's on the drive? I looked at Elena, at her perfect makeup and designer clothes, at the engagement ring that should have been mine. At my mother, who'd spent my entire life making me feel like a burden, a mistake, something to be managed rather than loved. Financial records, I said, my voice steady now. Bank statements, wire transfers, medical bills. All the proof of what our family really is. Elena's face went white. Maya, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. I turned to David, my heart breaking at the trust still written across his features. My parents have been embezzling from the foundation for blind children where you volunteer, David. The foundation where we met. They've been stealing money meant for kids like you, kids who needed help. The silence that followed was deafening. David's face went through a series of emotions, disbelief, confusion, and then a dawning horror that made my chest ache. That's impossible, he whispered. My mother's mask finally slipped completely. Maya has always had an overactive imagination, David. Her mental health issues. My mental health issues? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You mean the breakdown you orchestrated? The psychiatric hold you arranged after I found that drive? Maya, please. Elena started. No. I slammed my hand on the table, making the coffee cups jump. I'm done protecting you. I'm done being the family's scapegoat. I looked directly at David. They found out I discovered their theft. So they convinced my therapist I was having a psychotic break. They had me committed for 72 hours, and while I was locked up, they told you I didn't want to see you anymore. David's hands were shaking now. That's not. They said you were sick, that you needed space. I was never sick, David. I was inconvenient. The words tasted like freedom and poison all at once. And when I got out, They made it clear that if I ever tried to contact you or expose them, they'd have me committed again. Permanently this time. Elena was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks in black rivers. Maya, you have to understand, we never meant for it to go this far. When David was so heartbroken, I just wanted to comfort him. You wanted to steal him, I corrected. Just like you stole everything else. David stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I need to see what's on that drive. Now. My mother made one last desperate play. David, you have to understand, Maya's accusations are serious, but she's not well. She's never been well. The family has always had to. Enough. David's voice cut through her words like a blade. Maya, is there a computer here we can use? The coffee shop's ancient laptop wheezed to life as David inserted the flash drive with hands that shook slightly. I sat beside him, close enough to smell his familiar scent beneath Elena's chosen cologne, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. The files opened like a dam bursting. Bank statements showing regular transfers from the foundation's accounts to my parents' personal finances. Medical bills for my father's experimental treatments, paid for with money meant for children's Braille education programs. Email chains discussing how to cover their tracks, how to make the missing funds look like administrative costs. And then, buried deep in a subfolder, the recordings. My mother's voice, crystal clear through the laptop speakers. Maya's getting too close. We need to handle this before she ruins everything. My father's response, Dr. Morrison owes us a favor. One call about Maya's deteriorating mental state, and we can have her committed for observation. Elena's voice, younger sounding but unmistakably hers. What about David? He'll ask questions. Leave David to me, my mother said. Blind people are naturally trusting. We'll tell him Maya doesn't want to see him, that the stress of the relationship was making her worse. He'll believe it because he'll want to protect her. The recording continued, laying out their plan in devastating detail. How they'd use my history of depression against me. How they'd convince David that staying away was an act of love. How Elena would be there to comfort him, to slowly replace me in his affections. David's face had gone gray, his hands clenched into fists on the table. Elena was sobbing openly now, and my mother looked like she'd aged a decade in the span of minutes. 3 years, David whispered. 3 years I thought you didn't love me anymore. I never stopped loving you, I said, my own tears finally coming. Not for a single day. He turned toward me, his hand finding mine across the table. Maya, I'm so sorry. I should have known, should have questioned. How could you have known? They're very good at what they do. Elena suddenly stood, her chair clattering backward. I can't do this. I can't marry you tomorrow knowing what I know now. She pulled the engagement ring from her finger and placed it on the table with a soft clink. I'm sorry, David. I'm so sorry for all of it. She ran from the coffee shop, leaving the three of us in the wreckage of her confession. My mother tried one last time. Maya, if you expose this, you'll destroy the family. Your father's cancer treatments should have been paid for honestly, I finished. Not with money stolen from children who needed it more. David was already pulling out his phone. I'm calling the police. And the foundation's board. They need to know what happened to their funds. As he made the calls, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years. Peace. The truth was finally free, spreading like light into all the dark corners where lies had festered. My mother left without another word, her shoulders bowed under the weight of her crumbling world. When David finished his calls, he turned back to me. Maya, I know I have no right to ask this after everything that's happened, but... Yes, I said before he could finish. You don't even know what I was going to ask. I smiled, really smiled for the first time in years. You were going to ask if we could try again. If there was still a chance for us. He reached across the table and took my hands in his. Is there? Outside, the Seattle rain had stopped, and for the first time in 3 years, the sun was shining through the coffee shop windows. I thought about the wedding that wouldn't happen tomorrow, about the family that would never forgive me, about the long road ahead of rebuilding trust and love from the ashes of betrayal. Yes, I said again, and meant it with every broken, healing piece of my heart. There's always a chance. David lifted my hand to his lips and kissed my knuckles, the same gesture he'd made 1,000 times before my world fell apart. But this time, it felt like a beginning instead of an ending. The flash drive sat forgotten on the table between us, its secrets finally free. Tomorrow, there would be investigations and arrests, trials and consequences. My parents would face justice for their crimes, and I would have to rebuild relationships with the few family members who might still speak to me. But today, in this moment, with David's hands warm in mine and the truth finally spoken, I was free. Free from the lies that had caged me, free from the guilt that had poisoned my days, free to love and be loved without shame or fear. The broken pieces of my life were finally ready to be put back together, and this time, I would be the one holding the glue.